Okay.
Yes.
All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm glad to have this opportunity to talk and be with you today. Welcome people online watching as well. We're going to be thinking a little bit about the situation in the Holy Land right now in Palestine and Israel and Gaza. And as you all know, this is an incredibly difficult and torturous situation for all people involved. And so as we begin, I'll start with a prayer, but really want to lift up hopes for peace and safety and security and well-being for everyone in that area. And as we go through our time together today, I'll be sharing some perspectives, especially from Palestinian and Palestinian Lutheran Christians, as those are the people that I know well. We'll also realize that there are other people who have very deep emotional and spiritual connections and ties to what's happening there, and we won't hear and have time to think about every voice and every perspective as we gather today. And so I realize that and ask for your understanding. And I'm not a expert in geopolitics or some of those kinds of things, but I'm glad to share some of what I can and answer questions as well in what really has been a heart-wrenching situation for the world, really. So let us begin with a word of prayer. Loving God, creator of the universe, in times where we see things that seem so contrary to your hopes and to your will, we ask that you would guide leaders and all peoples to seek peace and reconciliation, to find ways to combat evil and to stand up for one another, recognizing in each person a being who was created in your image. God, as we gather here at Midvale Community Lutheran, sometimes we may feel helpless, we may feel like there's nothing we can do, but know that when our thoughts and prayers and attention are lifted to those who are suffering, to those who are struggling, to those who are in fear, it provides comfort and accompaniment. And sometimes that is so important. God, as we gather, bless our time, open our minds and our hearts, and in all things, help us to care for one another and the world you have made. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, I am going to just share some slides and some perspectives from you from our context in the Lutheran Church and specifically Palestinian Lutherans as well. And as we go through, I'm going to begin with a little overview. Some of this, most of you, let's see. I guess it is okay. We are being recorded. There we go. All right. So we'll share with you some of the background of what's currently happening. Many of you know this situation and know this background. We hear a lot about it in the news, and many of you have multiple news sources, and I encourage everyone to consider the sources of the news that you're receiving, and also try and find sources that may be ones that aren't always in the mainstream. There are lots of different voices and perspectives on what's happening, and I find that often it is not always seeing all sides, but sometimes we get a good perspective. And so even though sometimes we want to turn away from the news because it's so hard to hear, it's something that we can learn as we engage with the situation and try and find ways that we can have some agency or some help. As you know, October 7th, Hamas, a terrorist group, attacked and killed 1,200 Israeli citizens, and 250 hostages were taken. Many people have likened the experience of this for people in Israel to the experience of Americans on 9/11 as a shocking and eye-opening realization of their vulnerability and the experience of terror and destruction that occurred. Then shortly thereafter, after a week or so of working and planning, Israel invaded Gaza. There's been approximately 105 days of warfare now, give or take a few days. In that time, nearly 25,000 now Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, of which 10,000 are children. They're saying probably 70 to 80% of those who have been killed are women and children. The Palestinian population in Gaza is one of the most, if not the most youthful populations in the world. So they have a high percentage of people in the population who are under 18. And obviously many of the people, a majority of the people who have been killed have been non-combatants. And this has been an incredible source of grief and also tension and struggle within the world community. The proposition is to destroy Hamas, but the world is seeking for the discernment between civilian and non-civilian targets, but that is made certainly much more difficult by the way Hamas has embedded its military and other capabilities in what we would typically consider civilian areas and civilian institutions. And so it's a very difficult situation in many ways in terms of that. I didn't put it on here, but also during this time, there have been scores of Israeli soldiers killed during the battles. There have also been close to 500 Palestinians killed in the West Bank by Israeli settlers and militants that have increased the violence there. The West Bank is on the eastern edge of Israel with the border with Jordan. Gaza is the little strip of land along the Mediterranean near the border with Egypt. During the time where there was negotiations and work towards releasing the hostages, 110 hostages were released from the ones that were taken in the raid. Also released were 240 Palestinians from Israeli jails. Among those were over 100 children that had been jailed in Israel. 33 hostages are believed to have been killed. Since when the attack happened on October 7th, Israel had a little over 5,000 Palestinians in detainment that had not been charged with any crime. Of those were these 240 who were released, including mostly women and children. After the Gaza invasion, there is now over 10,000 people who have been detained by the Israeli authorities without charge or crime, and they have really increase the number of people that they are holding, and you will talk a little bit more about that as a security measure from their perspective. Gaza's population of 2.3 million residents, 85% have been displaced, and 1% have been killed. Over 55% of the buildings have been damaged or destroyed. And so you can imagine what a devastating experience that would be, to have that percentage of the population having to be dislocated, living in places of tents or in rubble. And so it has been truly a devastating impact on Gaza. So that's a little bit of the current situation. As you know, there's new things happening every day. Our U.S. government, which I think is somewhat critical to our understanding, has been very supportive of Israel and its right to defend itself and to do whatever is needed. Over the course of the conflict, our government has become less outwardly carte blanche giving support and more encouraging Israel to use restraint, and also looking towards a future that would involve a two-state solution with state of Palestine alongside Israel. Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, just yesterday said that will not happen under his watch, and it seems a surprising comment, but I think it is a way for him to assert his role and his power, and a way to say, as long as I'm your leader, we won't give in to people who think we have to live with a situation that isn't secure for us from the Israeli perspective. And I can talk more about some of that, but I think our own government's actions and involvement and diplomacy are something that we have a chance to impact. And so it's important to know what we are doing as a country. We give, in general, in normal times, about $3.4 billion in military aid to Israel every year. It's the highest foreign aid that we give to any country. And since the war has started, we've increased that with emergency funding for military means. And those are not only for the air dome that we see, the defensive, but those are also offensive weapons and tactics that we provide and support for the Israeli military throughout this time. So I don't have a lot of time to talk about that. We could talk about this slide for the whole time, but any initial questions or comments, Rhoda? Oh, sorry, there is a microphone coming, yes.
Of the number of Gazans who've been maimed?
Yeah, that is a good question. So in addition to the people who have been killed, 25,000, they're saying probably 6,000 to 8,000 have been seriously injured to losing a limb or some other major injury that will be, life altering. So that would add to that 25,000 who have been killed. The casualties is also very high. All right, I'm going to move on, but we can come back to other questions. Just one more slide of background, some important dates. You can see the map there, the West Bank on the right, Gaza Strip in the lower left. In around 47, the UN created a plan to partition Palestine into two states, a state for Israel and a state for Palestine. Before that plan was enacted by the UN, Israel decided unilaterally to declare independence. And at that time in 1948, the war for independence from the Israeli perspective, or what's called the Nakba, or catastrophe from the Palestinian perspective, occurred. And the Israeli military drove out 750,000 Palestinians from their homes in primarily the area in between Gaza and the West Bank, and they were settled in refugee camps in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Jordan, and in Lebanon. So since that time, this conflict has increased in intensity and waxed and waned at certain times, but that really was a key point for this history. From that moment on, many Palestinians have kept the keys and passed them down by generation to their family homes that they were kicked out of in that war. And if you go to Bethlehem, the entrance to the city, there is a giant key to signify the fact that they were displaced and never allowed the right to return to their homes. So that's a very important perspective for their side. In 1967, the 6 Days War occurred. In that time, Israel took over the West Bank and Gaza, and even went to Sinai and Golan have also been captured by Israel. Sinai was returned to Egypt, and Gaza and the West Bank have been militarily occupied since that time, and have in one thing that I want to mention, in 1987 was what's called the first intifada, or uprising is what intifada means in Arabic. And this was a fairly nonviolent and peaceful intifada that involved general strikes and other ways of more nonviolent action that was actually quite successful, in the sense that it led to the Oslo Accords ultimately, and to peace statements. And I think, sorry, that should say 1993, not 2003. Sorry about that. That's incorrect. My typing got off there. And so that, I think, is really something important to note. A little while ago, there was a speaker that was brought into the UW by their Interfaith Council and the Interfaith Peace Working Group here in Madison, talking about the success of nonviolent resistance movements, and highlighted a number of experiences from, India and South Africa, the civil rights movement. And one of the ones that was actually termed a success was this 1987 Intifada, where this nonviolent action moved towards these peace accords for Oslo. After that, there was some strong reaction to those movements that would actually look like creating a reality of a Palestinian state. And that was the last real time of hopefulness that there could be a two-state solution. Then further, the Second Intifada and other movements became more violent, and the responses from the Israeli side also became much more violent, and that led to the building of the separation wall and continued division among the society. So in 2018, the United States moved its embassy to Jerusalem, which was going against what had been a longstanding principle of the U.S. government, that there should be a two-state solution and that Jerusalem should be a capital for both the Israeli and Palestinian peoples. And this symbolized that Jerusalem from that movement was more an Israeli capital, and there was no recognition given to East Jerusalem as the potential for a Palestinian capital. So that was what our government did in 2018. I think I'll just move on there, but any questions about that background? I don't know if I'll. All right, I'm gonna have one more slide. So this is a common slide that is shown about the loss of land where Palestinians are free to live. You can see that before the partition and before that War of Independence, Nakba, Palestinians lived in most of the land that is currently Palestine. In the partition plan of 1947, you can see that the UN decided this would be the division. After the War for Independence, you can see that the actual territory that was given for Palestinians was much smaller than the UN had initially petitioned. And then after the Oslo Accords, it became even smaller. The Oslo Accords created 3 zones within the West Bank and Gaza, where there would be different levels of oversight. One zone would be for the Palestinian Authority, another would be Palestinian Authority governed but Israeli military control, and the third would be completely governed by Israel, even though it's in these territories that are supposed to be for Palestinian land. And so you can see that progression. This is, for many, maybe a controversial statement, but I want to share what Reverend Mitri Rahab, who is a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land. He was the pastor at Christmas Lutheran Church in Bethlehem and was now the founder and president of Dar al-Kalima University in Bethlehem. And he has written a recent book called Decolonizing Palestine that came out this last year in 2023. And it talks about his perspective as a Palestinian on what's happened in the land. And he writes that Israel is part of a Western colonial settler experience where people come to live in another country, not to live with the native people, but to replace the native people and drive them out of their country. Now, certainly there are people who would take difficulty with that, but from his perspective, and if you look at some of the speaking from the far right that is currently in the government of Israel, many of them would claim this entire land for all Israel and for the Jewish population, with no worries about saying that all the Palestinians who live there should move somewhere else and be relocated. Part of that is from a understanding of the Old Testament that says that this was the promised land that was given for all eternity to the Jewish people. As Christians and as people who live in this time and place, we would want to say that that covenant was changed, and in Jesus we know that God has welcomed all people into the family of God, but for Jewish people in particular, there is a variety of perspectives on what does the land of Israel mean. For many, it is certainly a safe haven and a safe harbor that is necessary after the Holocaust for their survival. But in terms of religious identity, after the destruction of the temple, Jewish believers created their own communities and synagogues around the world, and there's not the sense that they need to recreate what was lost in ancient times, whereas some would say it needs to be returned. One of the biggest movements towards the restoring of an ancient Jerusalem and ancient Israel is from the Christian Zionist movement. So from Christians, especially in the United States, who see that as a precursor to the rapture and the return of Christ, which I would not agree with in any way, but that's part of where the support for some of these ideas come from. In terms of the descriptions of this area, for example, we call it the West Bank, the Palestinian territories, the occupied territories. Those who believe it should be returned to Jewish control would call it Judea and Samaria, the ancient biblical names. And so you'll hear that sometimes in the conversation. But the question really is, I think, one to consider with an open mind, and is this part of other colonial settler projects that were in our own country with the Native Americans, or in other places where rather than cohabitating, living together, is it a time where people are really pushing out the native population so they can have their own land and colonize it in their own way? So that's an important perspective from the Palestinian Lutheran Church that is different from a lot of perspectives that others may have. Tyrone.
Yes, in considering, am I on? In considering the insensitivity of the world to this situation of the Palestinians being displaced by the Israelis in the 40s, I think we have to think in terms of what was going on at the time that was post-World War II. And Russia, after the meeting at Yalta between Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, gave almost all of Eastern Europe to Russia, and Russia absorbed the borderlands of Poland. Poland itself was moved 150 miles to the west, and of course many of the other countries fell behind the Iron Curtain, and a lot of the Jewish people were attempting to escape because they were being persecuted. And when you read some of the diaries and the first-hand accounts, it's really horrifying what this is post-World War II. I'm not talking about the Holocaust. I'm talking about post-World War II. And the world was pretty insensitive to that too. So this idea of the Israelis displacing the Palestinians at the time, I think on the world scene, was a pretty small deal.
Was a pretty what?
Small situation next to that.
Right. Yeah, I think.
And there are other situations too, but you know, you can go to China and to the Tibet, but the world has been pretty insensitive to these things. But the post-World War II was particularly bad, and I've studied that. So, but it's not really known by a lot of people. But I think it provides a context to this, what's going on right now. Yeah,
that the leading up to and through World War II, and then post-World War II with what was happening with the Soviet control of those areas really had an impact on, I think, the world's understanding of what needed to be done and what was important for the Jewish population, and also an amount of guilt and remorse for what was allowed to have happened by our inaction or inadvocacy.
And I forgot two key words. These were forced movement of people. It wasn't. It was a lot of voluntary, but a lot of it was forced, and that's where a lot of the suffering came.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know how many, what the population of the Israelis are? I mean, I know what the population is of.
So in Israel today, the population is about 9 million. In the West Bank, it's about 3 million. And in Gaza, it's about 2 million. Of the 9 million people in Israel today, 2 million are Palestinian. And so part of the situation is that if you add up the Palestinian population, 2, 3, and 2 is 7, and then 7 million Israelis, you see that the populations are equal. And in that sense, there is a really discernment about what is the best solution. For most of the time since 1940s, it's been discerned to have two states, an independent Palestinian and an independent Israeli Jewish state. As the settlements throughout the West Bank and the shrinking of what Palestine has been able to do have been happened, a one-state solution has been seen as maybe a possibility. But in many ways, the people in Israel and the Jewish community is against that because you can see the demographics. Soon it would be a majority Palestinian democracy. And so over the last few years, they've created different laws that have said that it is only the Jewish part of the population of Israel that is able to self-determine the form and function of the government. And so they say they are a Jewish democratic state. And you can see how that means that if there was going to be a one-state solution, it would not be able to be fully democratic. And so in many ways, a two-state solution seems like an ultimate path to peace if both states can feel safety and security, but we're a long way from any of that right now.
Well, and then I just wanted to follow on. In the 1920s, there was a very significant, am I saying it right? Yes. A very significant Zionist movement in the United States that was already pressing, and in parts of Europe, already pressing for Israel, whatever the right word would have been.
Right. It started the Balfour Declaration from Great Britain when they took over this area after World War I from the Ottoman Empire. Yeah.
So it's a very sad situation.
Sonia, did you have a comment or? Okay.
What others was saying, and it was just like one of the statements or kind of slogans that from the time, I think post World War II, and I wasn't alive then, so I'm reading this from history, but it was that Israel was it was created for people who a land with no people, for a people who had no land,
Right.
which was kind of a popular slogan, but it completely ignored the fact that there were people there. And so that was when, when Tyrone was saying that, there was a lot of support for that. There was, but in a sense, it was ignoring the reality on the ground.
Right. A lot of people, I mean, that was a popular slogan, but again, it's ignoring all the people who lived there and had lived there for centuries and centuries. And I think it also, some people would say it's a symbol of our sort of Western and maybe racist understanding that people who have a different primary religion or a different skin color don't really count. And so we don't see them as being there. And that is part of what some people will say is that movement was about as well, although certainly there has been as much vile and prejudice against the Jewish community and anti-Semitism as there has been other kinds of racism and prejudice as well. But it was a very misleading slogan that was part of that movement. I want to move a little bit to talk more close in on certain situations through looking at the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land. This is our companion or partner church, part of the Lutheran World Federation in this area. This is their previous bishop. I don't have a current picture of Bishop Azar, picture from one of their schools. The church is the church in Jerusalem, Redeemer Lutheran Church. In the West Bank today, about 2% of the population is Christian, of 3 million total. In Gaza, before the war, there were about 1,000 Christians. This is a much diminished number from 1948 when the Nakba happened. Over the years, as the situation and life has become more and more difficult in Palestine, in Gaza, and the West Bank, many Christians have emigrated out by just happenstance or their backgrounds. That many of them had more means and education and resources to leave, and so many of them have. And so the Christian population in the area is threatened, I would say, and very diminished. And I think that's part of an important part of the narrative. The Christian witness, I would say, especially from the Lutheran Church, has been one of seeking to create pathways to peace, of seeking to create encouragement of people to live together. And that's a voice that's often not heard in the larger context of many voices that want to seek conflict or retribution or revenge or other military means to provide for their security. But I think this is a bright witness to the light in this area. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land is a small church. There's 2,000 members and 6 congregations, so it's not a big group at all. They have support from our ELCA and other global churches as they go about their work and ministry. They operate 4 K through 12 schools, an environmental education center, one of the only places in the West Bank that cultivates native species and is the only bird banding and bird tracking centers in that part of the Middle East. There is a gender justice ministry that has been groundbreaking in Palestinian society, creating equality for women, both in terms of normal things that we might think about, but also in terms of in Palestine, divorce, marriage, inheritance is all controlled by the male part of the family, and they have created and it goes through the churches are in charge of all of those parts of legal society, and they have created a situation where they have put women and men on equal footing in those ways in terms of family law, which has been groundbreaking. They have a service center, a deaf ministry, and they founded a full university with now 5 colleges, Dar al-Kalima, which is a university focused on arts and culture. And they are a partner in the work of Augusta Victoria Hospital. This little church has had a very big impact in Palestinian society, especially in the West Bank. And so we are a part of that in our partnership with them, which I'm grateful for. The ELCA Global Mission staff has had people working in accompaniment and in partnership with the people in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land for many, many years. The current primary staff are pastors Gabby Alabuni and Megan Johnston Alabuni, who are pictured here. They have at least one other ELCA full-time staff person who is with them and their family living in Jerusalem. They are still there. The ELCA also has had a young adult and global mission program that has young adults ages 21 to 29 or 30 placed for a year of service in many countries around the world. And those programs were reinstated after the pandemic, and then the first year of the program reinstatement in Jerusalem, those students or young people and their coordinators were evacuated in early October because they felt that it was not safe for them anymore. But we do still, as the ELCA, have some full-time staff accompanying the church there. Our campaign or our ministry in partnership with the church in Jordan and the Holy Land used to be called Peace Not Walls, which was a way to say we want to work together for peace and not building walls between people as that separation wall had been built. In the last year, the ELCA has sort of put that to the history books and created a new theme, which is samud. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's an Arabic word that means perseverance and steadfastness. And that word has been coined in conversation with our partners in the country who say this is a more accurate understanding of our witness and our current experience. Perseverance and steadfastness in faith, in our hopes for peace and justice in the land. And so that has been the new understanding. And I'm going to just read this. It's a bit long, but I think this is an important perspective for us. The Arabic word samud has been used for decades by Palestinians, including Palestinian Christian theologians such as Naim Atik and Mitri Rahab, to describe ways in which Palestinians counter dehumanization and identity erasure through a lived strategy of resistance through existence. Samud is a contextual theological principle grounded in the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, who with his disciples also lived under occupation, and in the scriptural witness of the early church, which was a minority faith community. As such, Samud can ground and guide the engagement of the global church in Palestine and Israel in this crucial time. And it's especially true for us in the ELCA. As a church, we are committed to an accompaniment approach to global relationships and partnerships, and the ELCA recognizes we are called by God and invited by our Palestinian siblings into the relational work of accompanying communities in the Holy Land, to leading awareness raising and advocacy efforts in our own context. That's our call here, awareness and advocacy, and to help advance justice for Palestinians, and through justice, a real and lasting peace for all Palestinians and Israelis. The ELCA seeks to center the leadership, wisdom, and experience of our Palestinian siblings. And so what this is saying is we don't want to tell the church in Jordan and the Holy Land what they should be doing. We want to listen to them and raise up their voices and have them speak to us and to the world, and work in accompaniment and partnership with them, letting them lead us in how we understand and experience the situation. Any thoughts or questions about our engagement with the church there and this philosophy and theology that we have as the ELCA? I think it's a pretty remarkable and wonderful one. Sonia could speak a lot to this, I know, because she worked in the ELCA's global mission division for a while. But it's very different than the old-fashioned or traditional missionary understanding where we are going to serve and help and create a better situation. It's a situation where we're saying we want to listen. You know best what is going on and what you need and what you would like us to do, and we're here to listen and accompany you. And I think it's a really critical distinction for who we are as God's people. Just highlighting a couple of things that happen through the Lutheran communion in the Holy Land. Augusta Victoria Hospital is a Lutheran World Federation hospital that provides specialty care for Palestinians across the West Bank and Gaza Strip, including a cancer center, the only radiation treatment center in all of the West Bank for cancer, a dialysis unit, and a pediatric intensive care unit. It's the second largest hospital in East Jerusalem. It is also with the sole remaining specialized care unit in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The hospital in East Jerusalem often would treat patients from Gaza, especially for cancer and dialysis. When the war started on October 7th, and granted this is one very small anecdotal experience, but there were almost 100 people from Gaza who were receiving treatment at Augusta Victoria Hospital. Since those 105 days, none of them have been able to return to their homes. So not only have they continued their treatment, the hospital has provided for their food and lodging and basic necessities. And so as a ELCA, part of our support allows them to continue to do that. But it also means that those other people who had been scheduled to come for treatments over the course of that time, of course, have not been able to get any treatment. And of the 30-some hospitals in Gaza, many of them that don't have these specialties, only about 5 or 6 are remaining operational. And so even thinking about that kind of medical care seems almost superfluous compared to the basic needs of the people in Gaza right now. Augusta Victoria Hospital had satellite clinics in Gaza that have been destroyed or closed since the war had started. And so there is a consortium of hospitals in the West Bank and Gaza that had all worked together. But right now that is all very much frayed, and they're just simply trying to take care of the people that are there as well as their regular work within the West Bank. So Augusta Victoria Hospital is one important ministry. Dar al-Kalima University of Arts and Culture is another really important institution in the West Bank. As I said, it's got 5 colleges now. It's a full-fledged university that focuses on arts and culture. So they have a filmmaking, a drama, a dance, a tourism and history, and a culinary arts programs, all of which are designed to provide training for skills that would be very employable in a tourist-based economy, as well as also skills that help the Palestinian people tell their story through media, film, art, and dance. As Mitri Rahab, who founded the school, would say, so much of the narrative comes from other voices, and their voices they feel like are not heard. And so they created the university in Bethlehem to help to give the Palestinians agency and power. The slogan is, educating a new generation of creative thinkers for building peace in Palestine and Israel is their mission or their slogan. The university started in the Second Intifada, really, as Mitri Rahab will share it. He and his family were serving at Christmas Lutheran Church in Bethlehem. The Second Intifada was an uprising by Palestinians, and it incurred a dramatic crackdown. People were confined under curfew to their houses for most of the day. There was one day during that time where the authorities announced a lifting of the curfew for 3 hours. And so during that time, everyone then rushes out to get their groceries, to visit their relatives, and so on. So Mitri's wife and his daughter Tala went to see his grandmother, who was living in a separate residence. While they were there, the authorities announced that the curfew would not be 3 hours of lifting, it would only be 2 hours. And so they were trapped at the grandmother's. Tala and her mother then ran home to their parsonage in the campus of Christmas Lutheran Church, and a bullet went 2 feet from Tala, from an Israeli soldier who saw them outside after curfew, the mother and daughter. When she got home, Mitri says she couldn't speak for hours. Finally, after hours of just sitting without saying anything, she drew a picture of her and her mother with a bullet, and the bullet in the picture was as tall as she was as a young girl. Then she started talking and processing what had happened. And in that instance, he saw the power of art to be a way to deal with therapy of traumatic situations. And that led him to his lifelong journey of creating institutions through the church and ultimately the university to help Palestinians deal with a lifelong experience of trauma. Dar al-Kalima University today has only online classes, as most of the students who come from throughout the West Bank are not able to travel because of checkpoints that have been instituted after the October 7th event. 3 of their students have been detained without charge. Their satellite campus that they started in Gaza a couple of years ago has been destroyed. Several of their art therapy staff from Gaza have been killed. And this is, again, just a very small experience of the broader struggle and devastation that's been happening. But I think as Lutherans, we can identify, at least it's nice and important to know some individual personal stories of what's happening, and it makes it more real. A good experience that has come out of this, Tala Rahab is now a St. Olaf College graduate, also has a PhD from Emory University, and just in the last few months was hired by Global Refuge, which is formerly Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, to be an advocate for refugees, asylum seekers, and immigrants in the United States. And so this young girl who was about to be killed, just simply running from her grandmother's to her mother's, with her mother to her own home, is now really making a positive difference in the world and using her experience in a impactful way. So I think that's nice to see. There are some signs of hope in all that's happening. Here's a picture of Christmas Lutheran Church where Mitri Rahab was the pastor. And then the current pastor at Christmas Lutheran is named Munter Isaac, and he has become internationally known during this time, and you'll see some of the things that he's worked about in Christmas Lutheran. He preached a sermon, God is Under the Rubble in Gaza, shortly after the attack that was printed in Sojourners, which is a widely regarded Christian publication in the United States. And these are some quotes from his sermon. And again, these are his perspective. Not everyone certainly would find this to be their perspective, but I think as we, as the ELCA, seek to center and lift up our Palestinian Lutheran siblings, this is an important words for us, especially in the United States, to hear. He writes, "They besieged our Palestinian family in Gaza, described them as monsters and blamed them. Israel Defense Forces bombed their homes, razed their neighborhoods to the ground, displaced them, and blamed them. Our families, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, nephews and nieces took refuge in schools where they were bombed, in hospitals where they were bombed, in places of worship where they were bombed, and then they were blamed. Now again in our history, they find themselves facing the same choice, death or displacement. Our Nakba continues. Where are they to go? There is no place for them in this world. The nations of the world, including the US, are against them. They use money, weapons, diplomacy, and theology against the people of Palestine, the people of Gaza. Beloved, in these difficult times, let us comfort ourselves with God's presence amid pain and even amid death, for Jesus is no stranger to pain, arrest, torture, and death. He walks with us in our pain. God is under the rubble in Gaza." So those are very powerful and forceful words. And I think some of the most important words for us are in this section where as US citizens, it is our diplomacy, our funds that are supporting much of what's currently happening there. And so I think that's part of what we, as hard as it is, need to hear from Pastor Isaac in Bethlehem. This may be a picture you've seen. It went, you say, viral around the internet. This is the manger scene that was created by Pastor Isaac in Christmas Lutheran Church with the baby Jesus under the rubble. And he was interviewed in national news sources in the United States and Europe after this. And in all of Palestine and Bethlehem and the West Bank, Christmas festivities were canceled in mourning and grief for what's happening. The Christmas worship still occurred, but all of the normal celebrations and festivities were put on hold and canceled as they saw this situation, but also realized that they had not been abandoned, that Christ is no stranger to being amongst the rubble. Here's part of the Christmas sermon from an interview in the Washington Post from Pastor Isaac. At first, Munter Isaac said the idea of placing the birth of Jesus in a war zone was shocking. It was hard for even our own people, but it left a strong impression because the image is very real. It confronts you with the reality then and now in a very powerful way. If Jesus were born today, he said he would be born in Gaza amid the rubble. Who can sing joy to the world today? Photos of the scene have gone viral. A similar installation is to be placed in Manger Square before Christmas Eve in Bethlehem. Today, Isaac said, the Christmas story feels more contemporary than ever. In the Gospel of Matthew, Joseph, a Jewish man living in Palestine under Roman rule, is forced to report to Bethlehem for a census. He takes his young pregnant wife, Mary, unable to find lodging. There's no room for them in the inn. They settle in a stable. There in a manger, a feed trough for animals, Mary gives birth to the child who the faithful believe is the Son of God. King Herod of Judea, learning of the birth of a rival, orders that all male children under 2 be killed, the slaughter of the innocents. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph flee to Egypt. So the story is Jesus is born into hardship, lived under occupation, survived a massacre, and became a refugee, Isaac said. This is a story we Palestinians can understand. And one other quote, I know these are a bit long, but I think they're helpful as we hear from, this is from Mitri Rahab, from an earlier conversation around Christmas time. A few days ago, a journalist asked me if the Christmas story is a mirror of our painful reality, where then is the gospel in it? Where is the good news? Where is the hope? The gospel is this: when the fullness of time came, the time for the word to be incarnated, God did not choose Rome or Athens for Christ to be born at. He chose occupied Bethlehem. He chose to be one of those oppressed. He chose to be one of those terrorized. When the fullness of time came, God so loved this world with all its ugliness and did not shy away from it. God chose to encounter this world with all its might and terror. He chose to challenge Herod with the faith of an innocent child. God did not leave this world to its misery and pain, but embraced it with both hands and pulled it to his heart. And so in the midst of Roman occupation and oppression, the people of Palestine heard the good news of do not be afraid, for unto you is born a Savior, Christ the Lord. And in the darkest hours of the long night, the shepherds saw the great light and heard the angels giving God the glory. This is the crux of the Christmas story. But this is not the end of the story. If God did not shy away from incarnating in this world, we cannot shy away either. On the contrary, his embrace to our world inspires us to engage. Why stay in Palestine if we have options to go somewhere else? Because God chose this place and we do so too. So that is a call, I think, for us to engage with the suffering and the struggles of the world, to be voices for peace. And in some ways, tragically, what's happened now has really brought into the forefront in the world conversation the plight of the Palestinians over the last decades. And it's that shocking experience of seeing the suffering of the innocent. And that happened both certainly in the attack on October 7th, as well as what's been happening in Gaza and throughout these last decades in Palestine in many ways. And so these, I think, are words that will make us think in many moments about what it is we are doing in our faith life and in our advocacy and in our actions. One of the things that has been advancing over the last decades has been what Mitri Rahab calls the weaponization of anti-Semitism. And I think this is a difficult but important topic to think about. Mitri Rahab, in an interview with a German news organization not too long ago, after he was labeled as the anti-Semitic pastor, wrote these words: "We have to expose anti-Judaism, just like any form of Islamophobia or xenophobia. Religious plurality is essential today, and we should embrace diversity. Anti-Judaism is not the only kind of religiously motivated hatred. There are also evangelicals who interpret Holy Scripture as anti-Palestinian. They evoke God as the God of Israel to justify war against the Palestinians. They turn the good news into bad news for us as Palestinians. That's not acceptable either, and we have to stand up against it. These days, anti-Semitism is used as a charge to halt any criticism of Israel. People who don't want to enter into debate about the Israeli occupation try to silence critics and these accusations. But there is only one lesson we can take from Auschwitz. We must have the courage to call the oppression of a people by its name and not immediately take the side of an unjust state. That's why I'll keep talking until we have a fair peace. So this is a really tenuous and important point to think about, is that as Christians and as people of faith and people of morality, we stand firmly against any anti-Semitism, any prejudice, any kind of xenophobia. But that also does not mean we don't have the ability to discuss and look at situations from the perspective of morality and faith and righteousness. Discussing the nation state of Israel's policy and action is not anti-Semitic, and it's important that we do this in thoughtful and considerate ways. Part of what I value as a pastor in Madison is a long-term relationship with Temple Bethel particularly, and Rabbi Baich and his wife Bonnie Margulis. And we've been in conversation over these weeks, but also over the years. Our congregation's confirmation students have a class at Temple Bethel every year to learn about our connections and our heritage. But it also is something that especially Christian Zionists and others have used the label of anti-Semitism to try and put a muffle or a mute on any criticism of the state of Israel. And so this is something that I think is important to lift up. Part of what I think our work is to call for a ceasefire in Gaza and advocate for that through our elected representatives. The bishops of the Canadian and U.S. Lutheran and Episcopal Anglican churches put forth a statement at the end of November calling for an end to the war in Gaza, a ceasefire and an end to violence, and opening of humanitarian corridors. That has been the witness from our churches since that time. Interfaith Peace Working Group is a Madison-based group of Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and other faiths that work together to seek for peace. They have had a vigil outside of Senator Baldwin's office on the square weekly for a number of days. And then actually I went to the vigil the third week of December, and shortly after that, Tammy Baldwin issued a statement asking and changing her position. She had not been for a ceasefire, and she came out supporting a humanitarian ceasefire. I don't know that those vigils, they weren't large, had a huge impact. I think the ongoing worsening of the situation made a difference, but it is a reminder that we have a voice and an ability to interact with our elected officials and make our perspectives known. What can we do? Support the Jewish community and condemn anti-Semitism, act and speak against all forms of xenophobia, advocate for a ceasefire and a call for nonviolent resolution to conflict, contact your elected officials, subscribe to the ELCA action alerts that give you opportunities to communicate with elected officials and take other action. Churches for Middle East Peace, which is a ecumenical group in the United States of which the ELCA is a part, is also an organization that has a lot of information and opportunities for action. Donating to the ELCA disaster response, which supports the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land. Bright Stars of Bethlehem, which supports the college, Dar al-Kalima, and Opportunity Palestine, which is another U.S. Lutheran organization that supports the schools there, are things that we can do as well. So I'm going to pause there and just I see what kind of questions or thoughts or reactions people have or comments. Vince, yeah.
I was wondering if you can describe the difference between Hamas and the Palestinian people.
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. So Hamas has been the governing organization in Gaza since about 2007, and they are there they're described as a terrorist organization by most Western countries and other people as well. They have a history of terrorist activities. They also are doing the regular government activities that a government would have to do in that area. They were elected in 2007 by the people in Gaza, and the people in the West Bank elected the Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas, who's their prime minister, to be their leaders, which was the first time that there was a split in government between the two organizations. Many people feel like Hamas rules as a more authoritarian or dictatorial governing force in Gaza, that it's maybe not necessarily the will of the people that there would be in charge, but it's a difficult situation in that sense. But I think in general, Hamas is a terrorist military organization that most of the people in Gaza and certainly in the West Bank do not support. But again, it's a lot of gray area there and difficulty in understanding those nuances, but it's a really good question. So I don't know if that others maybe know more about that too could talk to that. Any other questions? I think right now, and I was talking with someone about this, part of the problem is the government in Israel and the government of Hamas, or the terrorist organization of Hamas. Neither of them want peace necessarily in a way that they are adequate and helpful partners to have actual constructive conversations toward peace. And there's not a lot of motivation. In many ways, each side benefits from the conflict and from the horrible things that are happening. The United States, our government, has one of the most powerful ways of being able to influence the situation. We've chosen to try to do that diplomatically. I think our financial and military resources and assistance that are either given or with the potential of being withheld would have a great impact on motivating people in the area to actually sit down and work towards a peaceful situation. But as of now, we have not chosen to use those strong emphases to try and create a situation for peace. And so that's one way that we can be advocates, I think, as the United States citizens. We do have a powerful position. Others? Carolyn?
The Christian Science Monitor had quite an article about the issue, or the whole issue, and one of it things that struck me is that they talked about the kinds of media that the Jewish people in Israel have been subjected to, and that they are not given a real true picture of what's happening in Gaza, and that they are really being encouraged to think about, I won't say takeover, but that sort of thing. In other words, this is our land, and they're not getting a true picture at all. So I thought that was an interesting thought, because they are the people who are supporting Netanyahu and who would have to be behind some kind of peacemaking if we go forward.
Yeah, I think, and that's probably also true in the West Bank. A lot of the media that they receive is slanted towards their perspective. And of course, in Gaza, there's no information. The cell phone and all the communications were out for about 8 days, and now they've come back. But it is true that and sentiment in Israel is the people who are advocating for peace and coexistence with the Palestinians within Israel has diminished over the years, and now it's probably at its lowest of all times. The far left and those who want to create a two-state solution in Israel is the lowest that it's ever been right now, which is not a positive inference for the future of peace. But I probably need to go, so I will take one more question, and then I'm going to get
like we had one on just a
church.
comment
Okay.
online that the Israeli prime minister has funded Gaza via Qatar because it helps his rhetoric and power.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but there has been certainly speculation that Netanyahu has done things that will allow Hamas to continue to exist in ways that create that foe that he can then use to support his own authority and power. And so that, and I think Hamas likewise, it's that unfortunate situation where you're stronger if you have someone to ally your people against. If we have a common enemy, then we can be unified, and that is a really devastating cycle. All right, I'm going to say thank you for your interest and conversation. We want to keep security and safety for everyone in Israel and Palestine in our hearts and in our prayers and in our actions. One last thing I do want to say, sorry, before I go. Our congregation alone, since November, we've received about $5,500 in donations to ELCA Disaster Response for the Middle East that will primarily go to support the Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land and their unique voice, I would say, for peace and trying to create ways of creative resistance and nonviolence. So thank you to all of you. That was as of the end of the year, and that is a significant impact that our congregation has made over and above any other support that we do. So thank you for that.